I said there could be cat content. Do you want to be the cat content? No? Okay. I always try to be as creatively diverse as I can within my stories. Make most of the fact that I am operating within a creative medium to tell the widest varieties of stories that I can. And yet, given that I've already established that I am working within a science fiction franchise in a connected universe, which is meant to be able to be accepted as our reality as well, the real world, which also tries to make use of as much real science as I can while still operating within the stories I want to tell, given those parameters, it can make it difficult when I also want to explore the avenues of stories that are told through the likes of fairy tales, the things that are more magical. While a lot of the ideas that we're going to go into the Ragnarök Chronicles I have been working with for at least a decade, this idea, for the story that I'm about to describe, this is like maybe just over a month old. So I am lacking a lot of the detail that a number of my other stories already have. Yet I still want to describe what I can about it for you today. Hello, and welcome to the Ragnarök Chronicles. My name is Dominic, and this is the channel where I'm just going to talk you through some elements of the books that I am going to be writing. Now, with this book that will incorporate this story, just as how I want to do a variety of types of stories in general, I also want to experiment with how the books can be done themselves. So this will essentially consist of two parallel narratives. The main one for the story, which is set in more the reality that you would expect, and then alongside it, quite literally, this more fairy tale-esque thing. And I say quite literally, in that if I can, we'll see how the services for printing and stuff allow this, which I should be able to find a way that it works, that all of the right-hand pages of the book, as you're looking at it, would read normally, right? And they would be your normal narrative. However, the left-hand pages, as you look at them normally, would first of all be this alternative narrative, and also be upside down, running from the back of the book forwards. So you would quite literally, if you wanted to read the parallel one, have to turn things on their head, turn the world upside down, and then again, from your new perspective, start reading the right-hand pages from what is now the front of the book, going backwards. So I just want to play around, have fun with how stories can be done, and that would be one of the more plausible ways I can think of to twist the ways in which books are done. As for still how I'm justifying how this fairy tale can actually be happening within the realms of the Ragnarök Chronicles, the mechanism for that and the justification for that is part of the mystery, and it is able to be worked out, but as such, I am not going to explain it right now. But what I can say is that through certain eyes, our reality and the magic of fairy tales may come across as one and the same. It all depends on your perspective. But to the details of the fairy tale itself. I've actually used this as a reason to make use of a number of odd random ideas I've had, because a lot of the time anything I come up with is just going to be a thing that could be true of a given world, or a type of creature, or a way in which a person behaves, or some societal convention that's opposed to what we live in. And they don't have any other story connected to it, it's just, this is a thing that I could use at some point. So within this more fantastical narrative, I say, okay, I can now make use of these here. So there's going to be some odds and ends here. I'm just say it will include these because, as I say, this is a newer narrative thread that I've come up with a lot more recently and incorporated into the story after the fact, after its initial planning. I haven't got all the details there yet. Don't know exactly how it's all going to fit together, so they will include this. Start off with a protagonist. So we have got this elderly, non-binary individual who kind of lives on their own next to a cemetery, because at some point I felt it would be interesting to do a character who lives near a cemetery, which in turn is near a forest. And from the perspective of others who may come across them, there's an impression that this person, who I've not got a name for yet, is missing most of their mind. Now, with that said, they still have more than enough the wits about themselves to do what is necessary per the story. So that also in part goes to prove the fact of how much of a mind they are to begin with. If they have lost most of their mind already, yet still are probably better in some ways, not to try to sound superior for a fictional character or whatever, than others in the community. Speaking of this community, we would also have some kind of king-like figure, albeit not one living in a castle, something like that. I have a couple of castles and a couple of other stories, and also just want to, even if I'm building on certain conventions that maybe already exist in fairy tales, I don't just want to copy them verbatim. So some king that lives in some other kind of structure, who goes to this protagonist for whatever reason, they've specifically chosen them out, for some assistance regarding his daughter, the princess, or more specifically, her girlfriend. Within this society, they have a certain belief about phobias. And to be clear, I am talking about irrational fears here, none that are, actually rational, either because of common sense or due to some personal experience or trauma or anything like that, a valid reason why you should be afraid of this. So it's just irrational phobias such as of spiders, of clowns, unless you have actual personal experience with either of those as traumatic. The societal belief regarding these phobias is that the thing that you are rationally afraid of is in some way what will be taking care of you in the afterlife. The reason why you're afraid of it now is that because your brain recognises this is something that's meant to be around you after you've died, to see it while you're still alive, it freaks your brain out and it doesn't know how to respond to it. So of course, while the people of this realm obviously still experience the anxiety that comes with the phobia on a surface level, they're kind of content with having the phobias because it just, this thing will take care of me afterwards. But in turn, that also means that if you have someone who is supposedly fearless, who doesn't have a phobia, that means there's nothing waiting to take care of them in the afterlife. And that's not good for these mortal beings. Therefore, others who are worried about such individuals not having anything waiting for them may justify as, they just haven't come across the thing that they're afraid of yet. They haven't travelled far enough, experienced enough. They just haven't found it yet. The princess's girlfriend is one such person who apparently doesn't have anything that she's afraid of. And the king is concerned about this because this is his daughter's lover. What would it do emotionally to his daughter if her lover had nothing waiting for her in the afterlife? So he has gone to the protagonist. So, well, can you take my daughter's lover and some other people on this journey through the lands to find the thing that she is afraid of, to reassure everyone that everything is fine. Now, as it happens, the protagonist actually also doesn't have a phobia, but the king just kind of puts outside as, you've just forgotten what it is, or in your current mental state you don't realise. Of course you have one, everyone should have one. So they go off on this journey to different places, trying to find this thing that the princess's lover is afraid of. In the meantime, the lover, she doesn't really care. She's not that worried about it. And so she takes this opportunity to do some other things. One of the people in her employ that's coming with them is her quest fetcher, who, when they pass a given community, goes around and sees if anyone is in need. And if someone is, this quest fetcher either brings word of that need or the person themselves to the lover, and she will then go on essentially this little side quest just to occupy her time to help those in her realm, or in the princess's realm. Regarding the creatures themselves that they may come across, one such thing is like a centaur. Now, for the purposes of this, I'm just going to say human top half, horse bottom half. Maybe slightly different in the final product. Again, this isn't a story that I've got as much detail about yet, but just say that for now. So rather than just taking the centaur as is, of course, I have done something weird with it. And what I've said is, what we think of as a centaur is its adult form. The young form, the halves the other way round. It's the horse, or whatever, top half, and the human bottom half. And rather than going through puberty per se, there is a day, a number of hours. If, when I look more into the actual original mythology surrounding centaurs, if by chance there's any kind of connection to a certain number, maybe we'll use that number period of time, a horrific unit of time during which they go from being a adolescent to an adult, when the body goes through a kind of metamorphosis where they switch, where that horsey top half becomes a human top half, and the human bottom half becomes a horse bottom half. So horrific, and definitely not mentally scarring for anyone who sees or hopefully reads about it. Don't know what I did with the negatives there, but yeah, it's a weird one, but hey, let's have fun with the creativity of it. For another kind of creature, I actually want to first of all establish what actually makes this land in this story fantastical, other than the creatures that live in it. This land, which doesn't yet have a name, doesn't have a sky. Instead, overhead, you have these other realms, these other lands that are just kind of hanging upside down and are passing overhead, kind of like how clouds fly over. These realms have a glow to them, and so it's the glow of these lands that provides like the daylight. And therefore, by contrast, when there isn't any other mysterious land drifting overhead, that's when it's night, when there's a lack of this glow. Now, I have yet to work out how the water cycle therefore works in this world, regarding where are the clouds and how does gravity and whatever. But we're going to go for this. Now, for the people of the land that we're reading about, since this is just a part of the worlds that they know, they're going to potentially spend their time just wandering about these other realms that drift overhead, try to spot, are there any signs of settlements up there or any kind of life? Does their land glow as well from the perspective of those above looking down or up or however you want to think about it? Is the glow more of a matter of how they're able to see each other, or is it that those other lands literally are luminescent and their land is the only one that isn't? And maybe wonder, is there a way to get up there? Can they build a structure or launch something that would take them all the way there? Now, the reason I wanted to establish this now is because the next kind of creature I want to talk about is something akin to a vampire. I'm not just going to be taking vampires as is, I will surely do something else with them, not just because also there are so many different iterations of vampires. Either way, the general concept is something I just really like and something I definitely want to work with and put my own spin on. Probably mostly specifically because of Nikola Tesla in the Sci-Fi series Sanctuary. If you have not seen that, I would suggest doing so, especially for vampire Nikola Tesla. Yep, that's a thing. Anyways, there's things akin to vampires, which, for instance, do not do well in the daylight of the other realms floating overhead. So they can only come out and interact with others during the nighttime. Therefore, they are resentful of whenever people just kind of casually are wistful about, oh, what would it be like up there? Imagine if we could go up there. Because for these vampires' point of view, they couldn't go with them if that was to happen. They would be left behind without choice and be even more alone than they usually are. So they don't like that. Maybe instead of blood, they consume bone marrow of the person or animal. Maybe, although this wouldn't necessarily work with the biting mechanism, but it's something to play around with, and I'd have to work out how the biological mechanisms work with the tendons and all that. But maybe instead of biting, it's instead a thing where the front of the teeth can hinge open and that sprays out some kind of venom instead. If that doesn't work for the vampire, I'm certainly going to use it for some other creature instead. And also, we have the idea of vampires not having reflections. And again, I'm going to have to come up with an in-universe justification for that as well, because I have to, even if it isn't a part of the story per se. The other reason I want to especially make that specified now is that if you therefore have this character that is however old because they are functionally immortal, who has either never seen their reflection, if vampires are more of a just natural biological species in this realm, or since they were turned, if we're going with more of the traditional, you convert someone into a vampire. Either way, they've gone so long without seeing their reflection, the most they've been able to go on is like sketches that vampires do of each other as a way of being able to see themselves anyway, as kind of a communal activity for each other, bonding exercise, potentially. You end up in some situation wherein, through some magical circumstance, you have a mirror where the vampire now can see themselves for the first time in however long. And just that fact of realisation lead them to be so utterly overwhelmed that they don't want to leave. And it takes a lot to ultimately, for the characters, obviously giving them enough time, but after enough time, convincing them that they have to move on. Now, I will openly admit that as a writer, I am most often more interested in the curiosity of the world itself and the adventure rather than necessarily the emotional side of the character's experience. Though I recognise, obviously, for the best stories, you need to have that element in there as well. But all the same, this is a definite moment where, again, it's something I thought of independently, just as the idea of a vampire finally seeing their reflection. It is a moment I definitely want to make sure that I am able to pull off and do justice to. So that's the vampires. Lastly, again, this is probably the one that has, again, very little detail to it, is something that will end up being original. Because before I've talked about some version of a centaur, some version of a vampire, I do also want to create some kind of creature that is completely original for this kind of fairy tale-esque setting within the magical forest, which will then tie into the idea of potions. Obviously, people can buy potions from these creatures, which will then do whatever potions do, but it turns out rather than being concocted as you might usually expect within a cauldron, in fact these potions are instead extracts of these creatures' own blood. They do things to themselves to an extent to alter what is going through their veins, and then the extraction of that is what then people would go on to take themselves. These creatures would end up actually being one of the more integral elements of the narrative going on. They would end up, I don't know if necessarily there would be the role of villains or antagonists, but they would be deeply involved in the driving thread that ends up evolving and developing, leading into the climax, which I'm saying in a way that sounds vague, like I don't really know what's going to happen. I do, in fact, but as per these videos not being spoilery, I'm trying to avoid saying any details and actually give away the crux of that part of it. So that is what I have there. Those are kind of the building blocks that I am starting with to develop what could be my version of some form of fairy tale, albeit with some slightly more twisted elements here or there. Although, fairy tales aren't new to being twisted, see the Brothers Grimm. To keep it from being more like the high fantasy of things like Lord of the Rings, which I would separately look to do in other books. As I said, I keep using the word, but to keep it more like a fairy tale, since the two obviously share and potentially a number of similar features, it all comes down to the style of execution. I'd probably also end up including other elements that you would expect to find, such as maybe, the lost children in the woods, like Hansel and Gretel, Red Riding Hood, Goldilocks, something like that, but maybe in this case, they're maybe not exactly what they seem to be. You've got the royal ball that people are invited to, someone that's cursed because they scorned another, your witches, your wizards, your goblins, trolls, the anthropomorphic animals like the wolf. These potentially being more like vignettes that are kind of come across and experienced as they go along their journey. Probably not tying into the major narrative, because again I've got an idea of what I want that to be already, and that doesn't necessarily incorporate them. But again, put in there just to help establish the kind of tone that is being gone for. Anyway, yeah, that's just what I'm working with here. Hopefully you found some of that interesting, as you will any of my other videos. Hopefully you stick around to see some of those. And either way, until the next time that I see you, just keep on telling stories.